Hello, welcome to another episode of the Bible in 1 year with the preacher's husband. Today we are talking about 2 Samuel chapter 5 verse 11 through chapter 6 verse 23. We're also going to read 1 Chronicles 13 through 16. So tomorrow we're going to continue on in our plethora of Psalms that we're going to do. It's going to be Psalm 1, 2, 15, 22, 23, 24, 47, and 68. So that'll give you a heads up for tomorrow. So we're going to jump in. Starting at verse 11. Right off the bat, it says, King Hiram of Tyre sent envoys to David. He also sent cedar logs, carpenters, and stonemasons, and they built a palace for David. Now, that doesn't look like a palace, does it? That's because that's not a palace. That is what has been dubbed Hiram's Tomb, or the tomb of King Hiram. Now, King Hiram of Tyre, he was the leader of a wealthy Phoenician port city. He sought to placate David through building assistance, basically building a palace for him. Later on, we'll find that he partnered with David's son Solomon as well in building Israel's temple, or King Solomon's temple, later on down the road. So Hiram is this character that's interestingly played through biblical history, all the way through David's reign and through Solomon's reign. Now there are some questions about the date on this tomb itself. It actually exists. It's about 6 miles outside of where Lebanon was, the Phoenician town of Tyre where he was at. It's about 6 miles outside of that. And there's actually 2 other tombs that are similar in nature and have similar markings on them that might actually date to a little bit better time period. This one right here that we're looking at, even though people say that was King Hiram's tomb, some experts have said this tomb actually dates to about 600 to 550 BC, not the 950-ish BC where we were talking about the time period we're talking about David. So there's a little bit of issues there as far as whether that's legitimately his tomb or not, but the world may never know. There's the tomb. So you decide. Well, anyway, after Hiram started this building, that's where we get the name the Cedars of Lebanon as well. In Lebanon, Tennessee, there's a forest called Cedar Forest. The Cedars of Lebanon was actually a biblical name for cedar logs that came from Lebanon there. Not in Tennessee, but the Lebanon overseas, of course, because they hadn't found this area yet. But we move on and we get a list here. David took a bunch more concubines and wives from Jerusalem, and he had many sons and daughters with him, and there's a list here. Now, out of all of these, only Solomon is going to later play a role in the biblical account, and that was when he becomes King Solomon. At that point, David moves on to attack the Philistines. God says, go ahead, attack the Philistines. This is what you need to do. So David went, he did it. He wins, they run away, and he decides that he is going to go find the Ark of the Covenant. So, here we have the Ark of the Covenant. So as David pulls together his group here in chapter 6 of 30,000 people, they set out to bring the Ark of the Covenant from Baale, Judah. Now, what happens is they get there and they're about ready to get this ark, and they start carrying it around, and this ox stumbles. When this ox stumbles, Uzzah reaches out to the ark of God and took hold of it because that ox had stumbled. It was just, he had a good intention. Oh no, don't want this ark to fall. But nobody's supposed to touch that ark but the Levites. So what happens? God struck him down. Boom, he's dead. So David's angry, and David started fearing the Lord that day a little bit. And he's like, I'm not bringing that to my town because ain't no telling what can happen here. So he didn't bring it to the city of David. Instead, he diverted it to the city of Obed-Edom of Gath, to his house. And over the next 3 months or so, the Lord blessed the household of Obed-Edom. And they reported this to David. He's like, what? So they're getting all these blessings and we left that thing behind? Y'all go get it. So David, and he went with him. David went and he had the ark of God brought up to the city of David. And when they got back, he was like singing and dancing and having a good old time. And his wife looked out the window. It says Michal, or however you want to pronounce her name. She looks down from the window and she saw King David leaping and dancing before the Lord, and she despised him in her heart. So he goes home, and of course they get into this big old argument. And after it's all said and done, she ended up having no children all the way to the day that she died, because they just didn't get along. He did not see eye to eye with her. So now we're going to move on to Chronicles 13, 14, and 15, and 16. Now, the thing I noticed right away about these Chronicles was chapter 13 starts off with David and the ark, whereas back in 2 Samuel, it starts off with King Hiram of Tyre building David's palace. And so 13 is the ark, going after the ark, and that's when Uzziah stumbles and dies. And then it says God's blessing on David when he starts building his temple. And then chapter 15, the ark comes to Jerusalem finally. So he goes back out and gets the ark and brings it back to Jerusalem after all that's happened. So the timeline here is a little bit different, but I'm assuming that all this kind of happens around the same time frame. And I'm assuming, just my opinion, that the palace starts to be built. Then David goes out to beat the Philistines, comes back without the ark, and then when he realizes this other person is getting blessed, then he goes back out and gets the ark again and comes back. That's the timeline that I'm envisioning in my head. You may disagree, and that's okay. We can. And then we get to the end of chapter 15, and we're talking about the singers again, like the singers that we see in Psalms. And what a choir sing in? We sing in choir robes, all right? So the singers, Heman, Asaph, and Etham, were to sound the bronze cymbals. So those bronze cymbals denoted that you would be the leader. David also put the Levites, says here, in charge of music and playing various musical instruments. The three main musicians, Heman, Asaph, and Ethan, took charge. Among the secondary musicians were Obed-Edom. Those are the only four out of all that list of musicians that did significant things. And Obed-Edom, that was the last host of the ark. It was at his house that the ark sat. And he soon became an official gatekeeper after that. Now, David was dressed in a robe. It says, verse 27, chapter 15, verse 27. Now David was dressed in a robe of fine linen, as were all the Levites who were carrying the ark, as well as the singers, and Shaniah, the music leader of the singers. So the choir singers and the song leader wore robes, and the Levites wore robes, and David wore robes, all when they went to worship. That's what they did. So why do we wear robes in the choir? Well, this is why we wear robes in the choir. It's all Old Testament. And there's a choir right there wearing some robes. So you ever wondered why we wear choir robes? There you go. Now you have it. We get to chapter 16 in verse 5. Asaph was the chief and Zechariah was second to him when it came to that. We get to Asaph sounding the cymbals in verse 5. That means he was the leader. The leader played the cymbals. Not necessarily always happening in today's bands and music. Does the leader play cymbals? I haven't seen that in churches lately. And then on verse 7, on that day, David decreed for the first time that thanks be given by the Lord by Asaph and his relatives. And then we have this psalm. Now, I found this psalm to be very fascinating. It's like, Chris Tomlin, you ain't got nothing on these guys. You've taken Amazing Grace and then adding some change to it. Well, that happens in Psalms as well. That's been happening. Mixing and mashing up songs has happened from the beginning of time. Verse 7 here says, this story here. David instructed Asaph to lead in thanksgiving songs, and he composed a psalm for the occasion. It had 3 parts that were later incorporated into the book of Psalms. Now, verses 8 through 22 here in chapter 16 actually constitute Psalm 105, verse 1 through 15. Verses 23 through 33 here in this chapter are Psalm 96, verse 1 through 13. And then verse 34 through 36 are in Psalm 106, verse 1, verse 47, and verse 48. That's fascinating that this one psalm that was written later became pieces of 3 other psalms. That happens today, doesn't it? Still happening. So if you've ever seen a mashup, Chris Tomlin was not the first to do it. And those guys that are on the YouTube and on the Facebook doing mashup songs and stuff, they weren't the first to do it either. It was already happening in the Bible. It's already happened. There ain't nothing new anymore. Especially not with music. Nothing's new. It's all been done. It's all been done. Oh, goodness. What do y'all think about everything? If I missed anything, put it in the comment section. We'll talk about it. Hit the like button and the subscribe button. And, of course, click the little jingle bell. And we'll see you next time for another episode of the Bible in 1 year with the Preacher's Husband. We will see you tomorrow.